Welcome. Today we're going to be focusing our attention on a really specific and I think fascinating slice of British music history.
Absolutely.
I want you to just picture a scene. It's London, late 1970. We're looking at a ceramics teacher. He's at a girls' school.
Right.
And his job is to teach art, how to fire clay, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But he keeps getting in trouble with the school's administration.
And the reason for this is quite telling.
It really is. Instead of teaching the curriculum, he's holding these impromptu record listening sessions with his students.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, eventually he loses that job.
And that teacher was Bryan Ferry.
Bryan Ferry.
Yeah.
And the band he was about to form is, of course, Roxy Music.
It's a really significant starting point for any analysis of them. Roxy Music is so often cited in musicology as the ultimate art school band.
Right.
And that's not just the label about where they went to school. It's more than that. It speaks to a very specific methodology.
A way of doing things.
Exactly. This was a group that treated rock and roll not just as, a musical project, but as a full-on multimedia art project. It involved fashion, cybernetics, pop art, everything.
Everything was part of the package.
Yeah.
And our mission here is to trace that biography in full. We're going to go right from those early days in 1970 through their explosive debut.
The departure of Brian Eno, which is a key moment.
A huge moment.
Yeah.
Then the shift toward that really smooth, sophisti-pop sound of Avalon. And we'll bring it right up to their 50th anniversary reunion tour in 2022.
And for this, we're drawing on a comprehensive set of sources: biographical histories, analysis of the discography, and records of their legacy and influence.
The sources all seem to point to one thing. To really understand Roxy Music, you have to understand this central tension. Maybe you'd call it a paradox that's right at the heart of the group.
Yes, the Roxy paradox.
That's the one. On one hand, you have this incredible high fashion, the glamour, the tuxedos, the models on the album covers, just pure style.
And on the other hand,
aggressive, experimental electronic noise, especially in the beginning. It's a total collision.
it's the collision of the avant-garde and the commercial. And the analytical framework here suggests that Roxy Music did something quite unique. They managed to influence two diametrically opposing musical movements
At the same time.
simultaneously. They're credited with being an influence on the raw aggression of punk rock, while at the very same time, they're seen as the forefathers of the whole new romantic movement.
That's incredible. How does that even work?
Well, the noted music critic Lester Bangs, he described them as representing the triumph of artifice.
The triumph of artifice. I like that. It's a strong phrase. And it has to cover over 50 years of history. So, okay, let's go back to the beginning. 1970. Bryan Ferry's in London.
He's just lost that teaching job we mentioned.
Right, he's out of a job. He decides, this is it. I need to form a band. So he starts collaborating with a bassist, a guy named Graham Simpson.
Now, Simpson is a crucial early figure here.
He is. He knew Ferry from Newcastle University. They'd had a band there called the Gas Board.
And it's worth noting that academic context, Ferry studied fine art at Newcastle under Richard Hamilton.
The famous pop artist.
The very same. So this is where that conceptual foundation of the band really begins. It was never just about playing chords. It was about the image, the concept, the whole idea.
Right. But before Roxy Music properly forms, there's this huge what-if moment in their history. In late 1970, or maybe early 71, Bryan Ferry actually auditions for King Crimson.
King Crimson at that point was looking for a replacement for their vocalist, Gordon Haskell.
Yeah. And it's so hard to imagine now, but Ferry goes in to audition for this incredibly serious, very established progressive rock band.
Robert Fripp and Peter Sinfield were there.
They listened to him, and they decided his voice just wasn't right for King Crimson's material.
Yeah.
But they were impressed.
Fripp saw something in him.
He did. He didn't hire him, but he told Ferry to keep at it. And later on, Fripp was the one who helped Roxy Music get signed to EG Records. It was a really significant endorsement.
It demonstrates that even with the stylistic differences, the musical proficiency, the raw talent was recognized by their established peers right away.
So Ferry has the ambition. He has his bassist, Graham Simpson. Now he needs the rest of the band. So he puts an ad in the paper.
And Andy Mackay replies.
And Mackay is such an interesting piece of the puzzle. He plays saxophone and oboe, which is already pretty unusual for a rock band. But he also brought something else to the table.
He owned an EMS VCS-3 synthesizer.
The VCS-3, that was, what, like a spaceship back then?
Pretty much. The VCS-3 was a portable analog synthesizer. At the time, this was absolutely cutting-edge technology. McKay's interest in electronic music came from his time at the University of Reading.
And he also knew someone else from his university days.
He had met Brian Eno.
And that's the next crucial step. McKay brings in his friend, Brian Eno. Now, the sources always describe Eno at this stage as a non-musician.
It's how he described himself.
He couldn't really play an instrument in the traditional sense, but he could operate the synthesizer. And just as importantly, he owned a Revox tape machine.
Initially, he wasn't even supposed to be in the band. He was brought in purely as a technical advisor.
Right. You stand behind the mixing desk and make weird noises for us.
That role evolved very quickly. Eno became an official member, handling the electronic treatments, the tapes, the synthesizer, and his addition really solidified that art school lineage of the group.
So now you have Ferry, McKay, and Eno, all with these backgrounds in contemporary art and avant-garde theory.
A very unusual lineup for a rock band.
You start to fill out the rest of the lineup. They had a drummer, Dexter Lloyd,
Right.
but he left in the spring of '71. So another ad goes out, this time in Melody Maker.
The ad's text read, "Wonder drummer wanted for an avant rock group."
Wonder drummer, I love that. And who answers the call?
A drummer named Paul Thompson. He joined in June 1971.
And Thompson is absolutely vital, because Ferry noted that while the others were all specialists in their sort of avant-garde fields, Thompson just brought this raw, earthy power. His drumming grounded the whole sound.
It provided the necessary rock and roll structure to support all the experimentation that was going on top of it.
Okay, so that just leaves the guitarist. And this was a challenging position to fill at first.
They had a guitarist named Roger Bunn who left early on.
So in October '71, they put out yet another ad. This one was even more specific. It was looking for the perfect guitarist.
The successful applicant initially was David Olist,
Olist had a bit of a reputation. He was the former guitarist for The Nice.
a well-known player.
But this is where Phil Manzanera enters the story. And it's a great story. Manzanera was one of about 20 people who auditioned for that perfect guitarist spot.
And he didn't get it.
He didn't get the job. Olist did. But the band liked Manzanera enough that they offered him a different role. They hired him as their roadie.
It was a very pragmatic decision on Manzanera's part to accept that. He stayed in the orbit of the band even if he wasn't on stage with them.
So you fast forward a few months to early 1972. The band is rehearsing. There's an altercation.
A fight.
A full-on fight. David Olist gets into it with Paul Thompson, the drummer, right at an audition for their management.
And Olist quits, or is fired. The accounts vary, but the result is the same.
He leaves the band abruptly, and suddenly they have no guitarist, and the next rehearsal is just around the corner.
This is where Manzanera's quiet preparation became very relevant.
He really did. So they invite Manzanera to the studio. But here's the thing. They don't tell him it's an audition.
No, they invite him on the pretext of being a sound mixer.
So he shows up thinking he's there to, manage the board, check the levels. Then they suggest, hey, why don't you pick up a guitar? And he starts playing.
And this is the surprise.
The big surprise.
Yeah.
Manzanera had secretly learned their entire repertoire while he was working as the roadie. He knew every single song.
He was hired immediately on Valentine's Day, 1972.
And Manzanera was distinct from the others. He didn't have that same art school background. He was the son of an English father and a Colombian mother. He'd spent his childhood in South America and Cuba.
He brought a completely different set of influences, a Latin feel, and a very high level of musical proficiency to the group.
So there it is. The classic lineup is finally set. Ferry, McKay, Eno, Thompson, Manzanera, and on bass, Graham Simpson.
Now, what about the name?
The name, right. Well, Ferry and McKay apparently made a list of old cinemas. They just liked the names.
And Roxy was on that list?
Yeah, they like Roxy. Ferry said it had a certain resonance, a sense of faded glamour. And he liked that it didn't have a specific meaning, but then they discovered there was already an American band called Roxy.
So they had to modify it.
They just added the word music. So Roxy music, a sort of play on rock music.
It fits the meta-commentary nature of the band perfectly. A band named after the genre itself, but just slightly altered.
So now we move to the debut, 1972. They're recording their first album, simply titled Roxy Music. It was produced by Peter Sinfield.
The lyricist from King Crimson. The connection continues.
It does, but here's a detail that just shows you exactly where their priorities were. The cover art for the album was finished before the band had even signed a record deal.
The visual identity preceded the commercial contract. The cover featured the model Carrie Ann Mahler.
And it established their whole aesthetic immediately. High fashion, retro glamour, a very specific curated look.
And that visual is actually what helped get them signed.
It is. There's a record of a staffer at Island Records, a man named Tim Clark. He was trying to get Chris Blackwell, the head of Island, to sign the band. And Blackwell was apparently unimpressed at first.
He wasn't convinced by the music alone.
No. But a few days later, Clark and another manager are just standing in the hallway of the Island offices, and they're looking at the album cover art, the photo of Carrie Ann Moller.
And Chris Blackwell walks by.
Blackwell walks past, glances at the photo, stops, and just asks, have we got them signed yet?
It confirms that the image was every bit as potent a selling point as the audio. They signed with Island Records very shortly after that.
The album comes out in June 1972. It was a success, critically and commercially, but looking at the financial reality of it all is pretty important.
Yes.
In a recent interview from 2024, Phil Manzanera looked back on that first deal, and he noted that the band received only 5% of the profits.
5%.
And that 5% had to be split between 6 musicians.
That's a stark reminder of what recording contracts were like in that era. Despite the critical success, the immediate financial reward for the members was minimal.
Very minimal. But they had a strategy to get more attention. They recorded a non-album single.
Virginia Plain.
Virginia Plain. It wasn't on the original UK LP.
Yeah.
And it just exploded. It hit number 4 on the UK charts. And their performance of it on Top of the Pops, that was a landmark moment.
It was. The visuals, the costumes, the makeup, Eno's feather boa, the synthesizer noises. It really cemented the whole glam trend in the UK.
It did. But amidst this rapid ascent, that lineup instability starts to creep in. Graham Simpson, the bassist, the co-founder, he became increasingly withdrawn.
The pressures of sudden fame, according to the sources.
Right. Simpson left almost immediately after the first album was recorded. He was suffering from some personal struggles and just withdrew. And from that point on, Roxy Music never really had a permanent bass player again.
It became a revolving door for the entire rest of the band's career.
So the band moves quickly onto the second album, For Your Pleasure, which was released in 1973. And this marked the beginning of their long partnership with producer Chris Thomas.
And another iconic cover, this time featuring Amanda Lear, posed with a black Jaguar.
The imagery was so specific, so thought out, but behind the scenes, the tension was really building. And this brings us to the first major turning point in the band's history.
The departure of Brian Eno.
Eno left in July 1973, and the friction, by all accounts, was primarily between him and Bryan Ferry.
There's a common perception that it was a conflict of creative direction, but it was also about stage presence.
Right. Ferry was the frontman. He was the main songwriter. But Eno was getting a huge amount of press attention because of his visual presentation and his flamboyant stage presence.
The spotlight wasn't big enough for both of them, essentially.
It seems that way. And when Eno left, the band lost that very specific camp avant-garde element that he brought.
He was replaced by Eddie Jobson. Jobson was only 18 years old at the time, a multi-instrumentalist who played electric violin and keyboards.
A completely different kind of musician. He was formerly with the progressive rock band Curved Air.
And the shift from Eno to Jobson is really notable. Eno, the self-described non-musician who created textures and noise.
He was replaced by Jobson, who was a classically trained musical prodigy. It fundamentally changed the sonic landscape of the band.
The sound became more proficient, more structured, more conventionally musical. The band lost some of that wild unpredictability, but they gained a different kind of musicality.
And this allowed them to evolve toward a more polished, sophisticated sound, which really ushers in what many consider their golden era from 1973 to 1976.
The albums Stranded, Country Life, and Siren.
Let's start with Stranded. It's released in late 1973. And it was significant because the songwriting dynamic changed.
That's right. Prior to this, Ferry had written pretty much everything. On Stranded, both Andy Mackay and Phil Manzanera began co-writing material.
Getting those Manzanera and Mackay writing credits really opened up the sound, and at the same time, Ferry's persona, the one he projected, really solidified here.
The suave, jaded Euro sophisticate?
Exactly, and it's so interesting to note how that persona started to merge with his real life. Here's this working-class miner's son from the north of England, and he becomes this global style icon.
The art project was becoming reality.
It was. Then the album Country Life in 1974 brought them their first significant U.S. success. It entered the top 40 over there, but it also brought a lot of controversy.
Her art?
The cover art. It featured 2 models, Constance Caroli and Evelyn Grunwald, in semi-transparent lingerie.
It was considered far too explicit for the American market at the time.
Oh, yeah. In the United States, major retailers refused to display it. The album was sold in this opaque, dark green plastic shrink wrap.
And later, an alternative cover was issued for some markets that showed only the background foliage with no models at all.
Then, in 1975, came Siren. This is the album that gave them their big U.S. hit single, Love is the Drug.
Their only top 40 hit single in the U.S., in fact.
Right. And the cover model for Siren was Jerry Hall,
who was at the time Bryan Ferry's fiancée.
She's painted blue on the cover, appearing as this kind of mythical creature, a siren on the rocks. But she eventually left Ferry for Mick Jagger.
A well-documented chapter in rock history.
It is. And following the tour for Siren in 1976, the band decided to take a hiatus. They effectively disbanded for a period.
This was the first major break. Manzanera pursued other projects like the 801 Live project. Ferry focused on his solo work.
But they did get back together. They reformed in 1978. But this time, it was without Eddie Jobson.
And the album they came back with was Manifesto, released in 1979. And this is where we see a really distinct shift in their sound.
A huge shift. The track Angel Eyes, for instance, was completely re-recorded as a disco track for its single release.
They were moving with the times, leaning into disco.
And it was controversial for some of the original fans. The reviews are mixed. Rolling Stone gave the album a very negative review. But then Melody Maker praised it, calling it a technical knockout.
The lineup changes also continued. Paul Thompson, the original drummer.
The Wonder Drummer.
He broke his thumb in a motorcycle accident. He took a leave of absence, rejoined briefly, but eventually left the band for good, citing musical differences.
So by 1980, for the album Flesh Plus Blood, the band is really operating as a core trio. It's just Ferry, Mackay, and Manzanera.
And they started to rely heavily on session musicians for the other instruments, for drums and bass.
This was a point of some contention, wasn't it? Ferry favored using session musicians. He felt it gave him more specific control over the sound.
While Mackay and Manzanera reportedly preferred the dynamic of a full, cohesive band unit.
But commercially, it was working. Flesh Plus Blood hit #1 in the UK.
And then, in late 1980, following the death of John Lennon, Roxy Music recorded a tribute, a cover of his song Jealous Guy.
And that became their only UK #1 single, ever.
A poignant moment and a huge commercial success.
Which leads us to 1982, and to their final studio album, Avalon.
Avalon is very often cited as their most refined work, certainly in terms of production. It was recorded at Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas.
And the sound is just. It's completely different from the debut. It's so atmospheric, so polished and spacious.
It has a very specific mood, somber, carefully sculpted. Tracks like More Than This and the title track, Avalon, are incredibly smooth compared to their early work.
It was a major critical success. And in America, after 10 years of being a kind of cult band, Avalon was certified platinum.
It finally broke them in the U.S. in a huge way.
And then they just stopped. They toured the album extensively, and in 1983, the band dissolved. The members all went their separate ways to solo careers.
And that separation lasted for a very long time, for 18 years.
Until 2001, the 30th anniversary reunion tour. Ferry, Manzanera, Mackay, and Paul Thompson all reunited.
But Brian Eno did not participate.
No. The reports from the Times say Eno was quite critical of the reunion initially. He questioned their motives, though he did later collaborate on some of Ferry's solo work.
So the hatchet was buried to some extent.
It seems so. And the band is active again. They played at Live 8 in Berlin in 2005. And they actually attempted to record new material.
Yes, this is a really interesting period. Between about 2005 and 2010, there were sessions for a new Roxy Music album.
And Brian Eno was involved in some of them, right?
He was. He contributed to some of the early sessions. It was a tantalizing prospect for fans. The first new material with Eno in over 30 years.
But it was never released. Not as a Roxy Music album. Why was that?
Well, Phil Manzanera spoke about it in an interview in 2014. He said that they listened back to all the material they'd recorded, and they just decided it wasn't good enough to release under the Roxy Music name.
Wow.
His quote was something like, "Let's just bin it. There's no point in putting it out if it's not great."
That's a significant decision, to have all that material ready and then decide not to release it because it doesn't meet the standard you've set for yourselves.
It is. Some of that material did end up being repurposed for Bryan Ferry's solo album, Olympia.
But not as Roxy Music.
No. And in a way, it preserved their legacy. They avoided releasing a late career album that they didn't feel was absolutely excellent.
That makes sense. In 2011, they did a 40th anniversary tour. And then in 2019, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
The performance at the induction ceremony included Ferry, Mackay, Manzanera, and interestingly, Eddie Jobson came back for that.
And then most recently, in 2022, they embarked on a 50th anniversary tour across the UK and the US.
Which brings the biography pretty much up to date.
It does. But we need to really talk about the influence you mentioned earlier, and it's such a key point, that they influence both punk and New Romanticism.
The connection to punk is very direct, even if it seems unlikely on the surface. Steve Jones, the guitarist for the Sex Pistols, was a huge Roxy Music fan.
I find that amazing. The guitars for the Sex Pistols.
He named his very first band The Strand, after the Roxy song Do the Strand.
That's a strong link. There's no ambiguity there.
None. Jones also cited their first album as one of his all-time favorites. It wasn't the glamour he connected with, it was the attitude, the noise, the visual aggression of those early performances.
And then the New Romantics on the other side.
Well, that's more obvious. Bands like Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, The Human League, they were all heavily influenced by Roxy's style, their sound, their whole approach to art and music. Cheek's Nile Rodgers has also been very vocal about their influence on his work.
And we can't forget that visual legacy. They were masters of using the band's look, the posters, the album covers, the costumes, long before the music video era really took off.
They worked with fashion designers like Anthony Price to meticulously craft a distinct look for each album and tour. It was all part of the art.
So we've traced this incredible journey, from a ceramics teacher and a non-musician playing a synthesizer, all the way to the polished, atmospheric icons of Avalon.
It's a remarkable trajectory, from experimental, avant-garde noise to the smoothest, most refined pop music. They successfully merged high art with pop culture in a way few bands ever have.
And they created a blueprint for what an art school rock band could be.
They did, and they also knew when to stop.
That's a final thought to consider, isn't it? That refusal to release new material they deemed subpar. How much of their legacy of perfectionism is preserved simply because they chose not to release an album that was merely good?
It's a testament to their commitment to the original artistic vision.
A detailed look at a truly unique band. Thanks for listening.